What's going on, guys? I am Mike with Obviously Outdoorsmen, and as you can see, I have a bunch of grunt calls in my hand today. And just like from the title from this video description that you just clicked into this video, all right, we are going over the types of grunt calls and when to use them, when to implement them in the woods. And this video has been coming for a while now. All right, I just haven't really gotten around to make this video, but a lot of people have been asking me to actually make this video to show them what these calls actually sound like. Now, as you know, all right, deer are not very vocal animals, but they do have their time and place in the woods to where they are vocal versus other times of the year. They are vocal during the rut and other times of the year. But we're just going over the grunt calls today. We're not going to really touch on the snort wheeze and the doe bleats and the fawn bleats today. We're just going to focus on the grunt calls. And you do not need this many grunt calls. You don't need to be looking like a duck hunter in the woods holding 17 duck or grunt calls around your neck. All right, you don't need to do that. All right, the reason I have so many and the reason I keep so many in my bag, I do keep 5 grunt calls in my bag. All right, one is because I like trial and erroring my own experiments in the woods, seeing what calls are better than others, and I like getting away from social media and the TV's impact on the hunting world to where they just really get paid to say that this call is better than this call because I'm getting money and you're not, and they're paid to say that some calls are better than others. All right, now for me, the reason I keep so many in my bag is that I found that some of these calls have more strengths than the other calls, and I like to keep them as backup in case I do lose 1 or 2 calls in the woods. All right, I like having backup. I always like having a plan B, and in this case, plan B, C, D, E. All right, but some of these calls do have more strengths. But we are just going to start going over the types of grunt calls and when they are used in the woods themselves. All right, so there's really only 4 or 5 types of grunt calls that deer will use. And to read them off, they're like the tendon grunt, the contact or social grunt, the breeding grunt, the doe grunt, and the buck roar. All right, and I'm going to go over each of these, what they are, what they sound like, and when they are used in the woods. And first off, we are going to start with the social or contact grunt. Now, this call is used by deer 24/7 year-round, and doe and bucks will use the contact or social grunt. It's a short, quick grunt, and it's basically just like in the name, they're contacting. They're just communicating with deer around them. And we really don't know what it means because we're not deer and we can't really ask them to know what it means, but it's just a contact grunt. It's just like, I'm here, and it's just like talking to them. It's like, hey, what's up? All right, and the social grunt, the contact grunt, it could come early season, late season, year round, and this is what you're going to hear if you hear it outside of the rut. This is the one call that you're really going to hear outside of the rut, along with like the fawn bleats and the snort wheeze. That's what you're going to hear, but you're not going to hear like a tendon grunt or a breeding grunt or a buck roar outside of the rut. So the social grunt, this is basically what it sounds like. That's literally it. That's what the social grunt sounds like. All right, normally it's not in succession with multiple grunts back to back, but they're normally just one at a time, and it will be like separated. So it'll be like, and normally it's 1 or 2 and it's separated out, and it's just for contacting the deer around them, seeing what's in the area, and just contacting to the herd. Right now, will I use a contact grunt or a social grunt? I really do not, but sometimes it does have its place early season. If a deer is moving out away from me, I will drop 2 contact grunts. If they're moving out away from me and I know they're not really interested in coming in and they have no reason to come in, I will just drop 2 like this. And that's really it. That's all I will really do. That's as vocal as I will get outside of the rut. And that's basically the contact grunt explained. All right, on to number 2, the tendon grunt. The tendon grunt is the one that is most known and what most people try to mimic when they're out in the woods. A tendon grunt is basically a buck chasing a doe, a hot doe in general, and they're getting frustrated. So they're chasing this doe in and out around bushes for a while, and the doe will not give in. All right, it's chasing this doe in hopes that it will get a chance to breed. And when this doe doesn't let it breed and it just keeps chasing and chasing and chasing, all right, this is where the tendon grunt comes into play. And normally when they get really frustrated, that's when the buck roar comes into play. But we're going to go over the tendon grunt first. All right, so the tendon grunt, right, it's basically a bunch of short, quick contact grunts in succession. and it could be longer or shorter. So it basically sounds like this. Now, as far as how long should you keep that call going, it's basically up to your own mind, your own rhythm on how long that you think it should go. All right, sometimes it's only a short couple quick bursts, but sometimes these bucks will call every step they make. It'll basically be in rhythm with every step they take. So it'll just be like, all right, now I personally wouldn't go a long strung out tendon grunt sequence, but definitely a couple quick tendon grunts in succession. It'll basically just sound like this. This is my normal tendon grunt call sequence. Now I will normally like vary in the range of like volume, so I will get loud, short, loud, less, and just like that, because you're mimicking a deer moving around, moving its head. All right, it's not just going to be pointed right at a deer's ears. All right, it's gonna, if you think about a buck chasing a doe, it's going to be chasing, moving around. All right, a grunt will come out this way, and then its head moves, and it comes out this way, straight down, up. All right, it moves. So you basically want to sound like a deer when you are calling. You have to make it believable. You're painting a picture for a deer over there to give it a reason to come in to you into shooting range. All right, thirdly, we are going to be covering the breeding grunt. This is one of my more favorable calls. This is the one I like the most, and I normally throw it in there with a tendon grunt, and I will throw a buck roar into a tendon grunt sequence as well. But the breeding grunt for me is one of like the one that seals the deal most of the time, right? Because if you're trying to paint a picture, most of the times you're trying to give the buck a reason to come in, and normally when you are calling, it is around the rut. So you are trying to act like a buck is chasing a hot doe, and that buck is not. So a breeding grunt basically is a long, strung out call, and it's more like deep, and it comes from like within. If you can think about that, if you ever had a burp that came from within and how deep that sounded, that's basically what a breeding grunt sounds like. Long and strung out, and it basically sounds like this. All right, try and think of it like a lion growling, or a lion like just getting pissed off. That's what a breeding grunt sounds like. I'll do it again. All right, and it's basically like it's breeding the doe. All right, it's actually breeding the doe. The doe gave in, and the buck is actually breeding the doe. So what I like to do in my call sequence, I like starting low and then like progressively getting more aggressive as I call. So if something very little works, so like a couple little tendon grunts, if that works, I'm bringing the buck in. I don't have to pull out everything and the kitchen sink to get that deer to come in. All I have to do is drop a couple of those, and they're coming in. But if that deer is being stubborn and I have to pull out more tricks out my sleeve, and more stuff that I know, and try and bring this deer in, that's when I start breaking out these different calling sequences. So normally this is what a typical calling sequence will sound if I'm just using a grunt call. And then I will watch the deer, see if it's interested, and then as soon as it starts losing interest, that's when I'll drop a breeding grunt. And that call is normally a longer, more strung out call, but normally only one of those happen or two of those happen at a time. I like to do my tendon grunt sequence, see what the deer's reaction is, and then if it starts losing interest, like if it was just locked on that sound, on that location where it was coming from, then it starts to lose interest or move its head away, that's when I'll do that breeding grunt. And a lot of times they're just like, what was that? And then they come right in. That's just how it works. All right, and last but not least, we're going over the buck roar. And I basically like take all of these calls and I mash them into one in my typical calling sequence. So the buck roar is more of like a mythical call to a lot of hunters, because they really haven't heard a buck make this call. but trust me, these deer do make calls like this when they're out in the woods. All right, the buck roar basically comes into play at the end of tendon grunts when they're really just very frustrated when this doe will not give in and let him breed her. So it'll just be a sequence of tendon grunts, and then the buck roar is just like a, hey, like, let me get it. All right, that's basically what it's saying. So a buck roar would just sound like this. All right, it's just a loud, strung out call. It's not as deep as the breeding grunt, but it's a loud, strung out call. So if you heard in my last calling sequence where I basically threw all of these calls into one, so this is how I incorporate the buck roar. So it'll go from tendon grunts, the buck roar, and then the buck roar again right there. And then I watch him. If he loses interest, then I drop a breeding grunt. And how I do everything, all these calls, it's basically just blowing into the tube. So it's just calling into the tube. But for the breeding grunt, I like to flutter my tongue against the roof of my mouth. Basically, if you guys are familiar with turkey hunting and you're trying to do a purr on like a mouth call, you're basically doing the same thing into the grunt call. So you're just fluttering your tongue while blowing air out, and it makes that deeper, more rumbly call. And what I like to do, what a lot of people do here, they like to cup the end of the grunt call as they blow into it, and they start low like this, and then they open at the end. So, and that basically starts the call off low and then opens it up. And you're just trying to sound more realistic. So if you think about a deer, when it starts calling and its mouth is closed, and then they open its mouth at the end, do like a lip curl, so it's like, you're just trying to mimic the deer and make it sound as realistic as you can possibly be. Now, the reason I have so many grunt calls on me here, I want to go over what these calls, in my opinion, their strengths and weaknesses. All right, this is probably one of the most known grunt calls there is. It's pushed a lot on TV. This is the extinguisher game call from Deer Society. And I do like this call for its convenience factor. All right, if you can see right here, all right, it has a fawn, doe, and buck setting, and it's all just from this little like sliding tab here. And you can go through it. All right, it goes from buck, and then you slide it up a little bit, and it goes to doe, and then it goes all the way up to a fawn. And that's more of like a fawn bleat, but a fawn grunt will sound just quick and short like that as well. But it's generally more of a fawn bleat. And then I did leave out a doe grunt. All right, a doe grunt is basically a more higher pitched grunt. And a lot of times a younger buck will sound like a doe grunt as well. So if you don't want to sound like that deep, mature buck, then just sliding up or higher pitching your grunt call will sound like a younger buck. So this is the doe setting for a doe grunt or a young buck. And then down to a mature buck. You can hear the pitch difference in that. All right, now I like this one because it's convenient, and you can just get all three calls in one grunt call. The reason I don't like it, it's not that I don't like it. I love this grunt call. The reason why I carry multiple and not just this one is that I feel like it loses its effectiveness the louder it gets. So if I go try and get really loud with a buck grunt here, all right, it doesn't sound natural. And it's very good if there's no wind or if the deer is close within 100 yards. All right, this call is very, very good. And it also has a coating on the end of the tube to make it sound more like a deer. If you think about it, how a deer's throat is like scientifically the anatomy of a deer, this basically covers the throat of a deer. So this call overall, a very, very good call to get into. All right. This next call that I have here, this is one of my more favorite all-around calls. This is a flex tone grunt call. I'm not sure its specific model. I will search it up and leave it in the description below. But this call, all right, this is the grunt call of the mature buck. And I like this one because I can get really loud with it, and I feel like it still holds the actual good sounding of the call. All right, I can cover every call here louder, or I could get super soft, and it still keeps its nice vocal range in it. All right, it's collapsible. It goes all the way down, and when you're trying to mimic a younger buck, this is basically how you do it as well. All right, you can hear the pitch difference in the grunt call. So these two are generally the two that I have out while I am hunting. All right, this one is good for convenience if I'm in a rush, if I need to one hand holding the bow and I need to drop a couple grunt calls, I'm out there. I can go through all the ranges of calls that I need to. But if I'm free-handed, all right, these are the two calls I have out. If they're far away, I could drop it with this louder flex tone grunt call, and that's basically what I'm doing with. All right, this next grunt call that I have here, I keep this one in my bag, and sometimes I have it out as well. All right, this is another flex tone call, and this one is from Bone Collector, and this one actually has an F and a D by both of the mouthpieces up here, and basically for fawn and doe. All right, I don't personally use them. All right, I think this call sounds very great. Again, it gets very loud, and I think it sounds very natural. All right, it sounds like a very mature, deep grunt call. All right, and I also like this top mouthpiece here. That one's for the snort wheeze, so I can go through it all. And normally I just use the snort wheeze with my mouth. I'll just go, and that's what I'll do for my snort wheeze. But if I want to get a louder snort wheeze and it still sound natural, that's when I use this call. The call is louder, and it's an overall good call. Maybe I will keep these three out when I am calling if I need to go through all the calling sequences, but that's really a very good call there. All right, these next two calls are older calls. All right, these two were my dad's calls. This was a Primos grunt call, and this one is it's a Lynch grunt call. I don't even know. I've never even heard of this one before my dad had it, but this is how this one sounds. And the reason I keep this one, again, as backup, and it also sounds like that very mature, deep grunt call. And this one, also, it gets very louder. It keeps its same vocalization. All right, again, it gets very loud, and I think they're all great grunt calls, and they all have its own purpose. And any basic grunt call that you can get out there, all right, I think it's gonna do its job very well. All right, and a lot of times this extinguisher call here that I showed you with the dial here, a lot of these other grunt calls, if you just pop off this top section and you get the reed here, you see there's a little rubber band at the bottom, and there's a whole bunch of different options here. And it basically goes from trophy buck, mature buck, young doe, doe grunt, doe bleat, and estrus bleat. That's all the different types of calls that you can make with this one call. All you have to do is move this rubber band up and down. But the reason I don't like that is because if you're out there fumbling and you have to make a call quick, you're really not going to pop this off, move the rubber band, pop this back on, make a call, and then move the rubber band back down and make another call. It's just too many moving parts. So that's why I keep it down at trophy buck. And if I need to make a different call, I will use a different call. All right, I will just keep these around my neck, and if I need to drop a snort wheeze, I'll pick up my other call. If I need to drop like a different type of call, I'll pick up. This is how I work. Maybe it's not as convenient for you guys. You guys can do whatever you please, but I'm just telling you what I like to do, and I like having the options and the backups in case I do lose a grunt call while I'm out there in the woods. But that's really it, guys. I will leave the description, again, in the description down below, what these calls are, where you can buy them, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did learn something new, please leave a comment down below this video, and like this video, share this with your friends, your buddies, your hunting buddies, your mom, your dad, whoever it may be, whoever you go hunting with. If you think that they need to hear this advice, this knowledge, this just information in general. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys are new to Obviously Outdoorsmen, subscribe to us, drop a like, check out our TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, check out our podcast, Obviously Outdoorsmen. All right, in the First Light Talk series. All right, we post a new podcast every single morning at first light. All right, and the video forms of the podcast will be on YouTube every morning as well, every day as well, and the audio platform like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, whatever it may be, they will have the audio strict version on all them platforms every single morning. Hunting, fishing topics, how-tos, informational videos, they are out there every single morning. But that's really it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, if you're new, subscribe to us, and thank you for being an Obviously Outdoorsman watcher. I am Mike with Obviously Outdoorsman. Hope you guys get on a big buck this year and use some of this grunt call knowledge this fall for some better whitetail success. Peace out, guys.